It is noon, and it is the greenhouse effect. I am your host, Hayden Greene, and it is a good day to be alive. We are going to have a good show today, and I want to thank everybody for coming in. It is December 10th. Can you believe it? December 10th already. We are a third of the way through December and well on our way to 2021, which for a lot of people is like, oh my God, I can't wait till we get to 2021. And I'm like, what guarantees do you have that 2021 is going to be any better than 2020? Anyway, so got a lot to talk about today. It is a mixed bag today of what we're going to be chatting about. I think that we are going to go around the world. We're going to talk a little bit about preemptive pardons and what exactly is that, and why should we care. We are going to talk a little bit about Fort Hood and what is happening at Fort Hood, and something that Hector brought to our attention way back in the summer. And so we'll talk a little bit about Fort Hood a little bit. Then we will. I think we're gonna chat a little bit if I can get to it. We'll chat a little bit about breakdancing and Chinese restaurants. Very interesting show. Trust me on this one. Very interesting show. All right, so if you're out there, feel free to hit me up on the comments. Again, I am your host, Hayden Greene, and this is the Greenhouse Effect on Thursday at noon. So to get started, we are in the final death throes of the Trump administration, and it has been quite a 4 years. And when you start and think back about all of the different things that has happened in the last 4 years, it's quite interesting. And so one of the things that that is now coming up is that it tis the season of pardons, right? So when you start looking at the end of all presidential presidential terms, when they have been, when they've lost their seat or they're a lame duck president, at the end of the term, you're going to start to see a number of different things. You see presidents pushing through legislation with executive orders. You see pardons. The only thing that we've seen from this particular incumbent is that he is hell-bent on trying to get lawsuits going forward to reverse the results of the election, not conceding that he has lost. But the electoral colleges all go to their respective states and they vote on Monday. So Monday is D-Day. So when the electoral college and all of them vote and say, hey, listen, this is the rightful winner of the election, it'll be all over. It'll finally, like, the electoral college voting is the final straw, and that's it. After that, he can't do anything because as per the government, as per the Constitution, the Electoral College gets to say who they're voting for, and this is regardless of what the actual vote is in their particular state. And we've talked about that on the show a couple of times, that the Electoral College could very well go to their particular states and say, I'm not voting for the people that you voted for, right? So, and I say this, and I bring this up because we were worried about it on the backside of it. It's like, oh, well, he could still pull a coup, literal coup, by saying, by convincing the Electoral College people to vote for a particular vote in a particular way that is contrary to what they had said in the polls. And this could actually work to the opposite way, which, once the Electoral College votes, regardless of what the polls say or the lawsuits are like, there were too many votes or there was illegal voting, the Electoral College came out and said that they are going to vote for vote for a particular candidate, and that happens to be Biden, it's game over. So Monday is D-Day. And that's the day when everything is all kaputs, right? And so we're not seeing very many people up here, so I want to make sure that everybody knows that we are live. So we're gonna make sure that this is happening. Yeah, so in case you were listening on the other channel, this is the Greenhouse Effect. I am your host, Hayden Greene. And as I was saying, it's Thursday, and we're talking the end of the Trump administration. So, like I said, at the end of every administration, you hear about a bunch of people who, you hear people do a bunch of different things. So normally you'll hear them passing a bunch of legislation and, trying to pass through executive order. You will hear about a bunch of pardons. The only thing that we have heard from this particular incumbent is that he's trying to pass all of these different lawsuits. But like I said, Monday is D-Day. Monday is the day that all of the electoral colleges vote, and that'll be the end of it, because regardless of what the actual polls say, the electoral college is the final word, right? So if the all of the Trump administration lawsuits even yield the reversal in votes that he's looking for, if the electoral college says that Biden is the winner, then that's it, game over, right? So Monday's D-Day. Monday's the end of all of the shenanigans, one way or the other, right? The hope is that it is not a literal coup, and the electoral college voters decide that they're going to ignore the popular vote, the electoral college vote, and the votes from all of these different states. But Monday is the day that will happen. But in the meantime, everybody has been having this conversation about, what's going to happen with the preemptive pardons. So here's the thing that is kind of weird. Like, people have heard of preemptive pardons, and they don't quite understand how this works. It's like you're pardoning people for something that they haven't done. So listened to a couple podcasts and did a little bit of research on this. So a preemptive pardon is when a president pardons somebody for something that they have done, but they have not yet been prosecuted for. So we see pardons all the time. So there are pardons for people who are in jail. There are pardons to commute service sentences. But the preemptive pardon is the one that we don't really hear because they're rare, right? The one of most note is LBJ pardoning Nixon for all acts that he did while he was president of the United States. And we'll get back to that. But this particular president, the one that's sitting in the White House right now for the next couple of weeks, has been using the pardons outside of the way that it's even supposed to be used. So the way that it's supposed to work is that the Justice Department comes to the president and says, or the president comes to the Justice Department, they work in tandem, and they say, well, we want to pardon this particular person. And pardoning that particular person has to do with finding out whether or not there is a reason for the pardon, whether it falls in line with the sentiment of the country, and yada, yada, yada. But the Justice Department is normally involved. The Justice Department is the one that says, okay, here's what we're going to do, and here are the legal ramifications of pardoning these people. He's done none of that, right? So he's pardoned people without talking to the Justice Department. He's pardoned Stone. He's pardoned a bunch of people. He even pardoned people when Kim Kardashian rolled up to the White House and said, I need you to pardon this woman because I think her case is important. And he didn't consult anybody. He just said, well, Kim Kardashian probably knows what she's talking about, so I'm going to go ahead and pardon this person. It'll be my prison reform pardon so that you can see that I am thinking about prison reform. That's what that pardon was. And he's doing it again. There's a guy on death row who was involved in the death of was involved in a protest or something like that, and it resulted in the death of this guy. And he's on death row right now. He has become contrite. He has admitted blame, but everybody involved in the case believes that he shouldn't pay with his life. He should be live out the rest of his life in prison, and he's fine. Fine. I'm sure he'd rather be free. But he has acquiesced. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll live out my life in prison just as long as you don't kill me. And so they're in the process of thinking about that and probably going to commute his sentence as well. Again, not through the Justice Department. And this has been the MO. And so everybody is now concerned about, well, he's going to commute a whole bunch of people's sentences. Number one on the list, Manafort, right? You know that he's going to probably try to get this dude out of jail and reduce his sentence. You also hear talk about Giselle Maxwell being pardoned because she got tapes. And I've said in this show many a times that the reason that a lot of these Republicans are all falling in line is that Giselle Maxwell got tapes on everybody. I really, really believe that. I believe every time a Republican stands up and says, hey, this is crazy, this is not the values of the Republican Party, he dangles a little flash drive and says, look what I have, right? So if you don't fall in line, I'm going to release what's on this flash drive. So I absolutely believe that Giselle Maxwell has tapes on everybody, and Trump has those tapes or knows that those tapes exist. And so in order to get himself out of all of this, he's probably going to try to pardon her as well. But the most popular preemptive pardons that we have started to hear about are for Rudy Giuliani, who is now in the hospital. I didn't mean to laugh. No, actually, I didn't mean to laugh. Rudy Giuliani, who is in the hospital with the corona, after running around trying to peddle all of these falsehoods without wearing a mask and hugging people on camera. And really? Does nobody have a mirror for Rudy Giuliani? Because I have to believe that if he looks in the mirror and seen what his life has become over the last couple of months, that he would take a hard pause. And I mean the hardest of the pauses that you could take. He is an absolute mess. His fall from grace, it should be chronicled on some sort of after school y'all remember after school specials? They used to do the PBS after school special. He needs to have his fall from grace chronicled on an after school special. In this year alone, he has held a press conference at the Four Seasons Landscaping Garage, mistaking it for a four-star hotel. He has gotten in front of Congress and talked about got in front of judges and talked about how people were voting for that dead people were voting, and that Biden probably could vote about 100,000 times, right? He has had the press conference where his blackness was running down the side of his face. And yes, and I said his blackness, right? His running down the side of his face, right? He has been in a Borat movie, soliciting sex from, or apparently soliciting sex from, somebody he believes to be a 14-year-old girl. And now, to top it all off, the cherry on the cake, on the cake is he now has the coronavirus. Amazing. You couldn't have scripted a worse year for Rudy Giuliani. He looks physically he looks like he's on deathbed. But secondly, he looks like that decrepit uncle who he shows up at the house and he's got a briefcase full of newspaper clippings and court documents and books that have dog-eared and pamphlets that from the 1950s. Like, that's what he is now. This is what this man has been reduced to, and it's so sad and so disturbing that to see him just completely go all the way off. So anyway, so that's Rudy Giuliani. I'm not seeing any comments, so I'm pretty much talking to myself today. Anyway, so he's one of the people that they are thinking that they're going to get a preemptive pardon for. The other people are, of course, his immediate family. So his oldest children, so the two boys and the girl. So it's like they want to give them preemptive pardons. So what is a preemptive pardon? A preemptive pardon, as I just mentioned, is a pardon where you get a get out of jail free card before you even get charged. So it's for crimes that you may or may not have committed. Well, that's the gotcha. That during the period of time that the pardon is for. So I can pardon, and we talk about Nixon, right? So LBJ pardons Nixon for the entire time that he was president. He pardons him for anything that he has done during that time. So no prosecutor can prosecute him, or he can't be found guilty. Let me rephrase that. No prosecutor can prosecute him for that because he has a get out of jail free card. Here's the kicker. Giving a pardon and accepting the pardon means that you accept the guilt. You have to say, I am guilty of these things, and the prosecutor can still bring the charges. You have to say that I am guilty of these things, but I have a pardon, so you can't prosecute me further on it. So there's a couple of layers to this. First layer is clearly everybody knows that there are things that they did that were illegal and need to be pardoned for. Clearly. I mean, he showed his hand when it came to this, right? Because if I need a preemptive pardon, if you're giving a preemptive pardon to people, it is clear that I know that there are things that you did that were illegal, and that when I am no longer president, I can't shield you. Therefore, I'm going to give you a preemptive pardon. So that's a given, right? So all of the time that we have been talking about, oh, well, are they guilty, or what have they been doing, and all the rest of that stuff, it's now out in the open. It's clear that they were doing some illegal stuff. You cannot dispute this, because if they're requesting preemptive pardons, it means I know that I did some stuff that I wasn't supposed to do, and I need you to have my back. So that's number one. Number two, if you give, and he can't, I don't know this to be true, but I'm pretty sure that he can't just preemptively pardon everybody he knows, right? So if we are talking about a few people that we are pardoning, and the prosecutors in the different places are going to still bring charges. They can't prosecute them, but they can still bring the charges. And they have to say that they're guilty. If they didn't act alone, what does that mean? Well, it means that they have a get out of jail free card, but it doesn't mean that they are free from testifying, because again, remember what I said, they have to say that they were guilty in order to accept the pardon. So if you say that you are guilty of said crime, if I'm a prosecutor and I said, hey, listen, I'm going to prosecute you for this thing that you did over there. It's like, nope, I did it, but I have a pardon. It's like, all right, fine. You don't go to jail, but all the rest of those people that were working with you, they go to jail, right? So the preemptive pardons, I think, are going to save the people that he wants to save. But I think that we have something that, and I hope they're thinking about it. I mean, I'm here in Brooklyn. I have a law degree. I just look at these things from an objective point of view. But I think that if he hands out all of these preemptive pardons, a lot of the dominoes are going to start to fall, and the people that he has not pardoned or he has not protected are probably going to start going to jail. And so it's going to be interesting because, again, all the people that are pardoned means that I can't prosecute you, but it doesn't mean that you get away from testifying and you've already admitted guilt in these things, right? So you got to get out of jail free card, but that don't mean that all of the rest of the people who have been doing grimy stuff for the last 4 years won't get caught up in all the rest of the stuff. So that's one thing to look at. The other thing is that he is now looking at, or has been looking at since like day one, whether or not he can pardon himself. And the scholars have all said you can't pardon yourself, and they've talked back and forth about it. And so the question is, if he tries to do it, will it stand up? And so this is where we come back to the Supreme Court nominations and appointments, because the person that he put on the Supreme Court, the main thing that we talked about was that he wrote papers about whether or not a president can pardon himself. And so when we are starting to look back at this whole spectrum, he knew somewhere down the line that somebody was going to need to pardon him. And unless he was a lame duck president and a Republican was the person who succeeded him after his 2-term limit, he knew that he was going to need to try to find a way to pardon himself. There's also an option that the President-elect Biden might pardon Trump. Some people's like, what? Why would he do that? Well, two things. Number one, if Biden is pardoning Trump, he's only pardoning him from federal crimes, right? We all know that there are a bunch of states that have lawsuits against him in the state crimes. Presidential pardons only apply to federal crimes. Only. So Biden can pardon him, right, for the stuff that he has done as president and that are federal crimes. But he can't pardon him from the stuff that's waiting for him in New York City. And Letitia James is sitting there just waiting for January 20th to come around. It's like, oh, just keep talking. I'm just going to sit here until it's time for me to get in that ass. And that's exactly what she's waiting to do. We talked last week about the fact that I don't think that he's going to go to jail, but his life is going to be miserable, right? His life is going to be miserable, and everybody who is associated with him is going to be miserable for the next foreseeable future. Letitia James is going to make this a career-defining moment for herself. So just wait for it. It's going to be glorious. It's going to be it. I mean, people talk about it's like, well, we don't want to be the laughing stock of the world. I got news. We're already the laughing stock of the world, right? It's we're already there. So those are things to think about. Like these whole preemptive pardons are, I think, going to come back and bite not necessarily the Trumps, but all of the people who are involved. So Don Jr., Eric, and the Stepford wife are all going to probably get away scot-free. Hopefully not come back and run again. But I do think that everybody who is surrounding them, who they're going to be forced to testify against, it's gonna come back and bite them in the butt. All right, I want to take a hard left. And again, I must have my comments off or something like that because nobody's talking to me today. And I hope I'm not, I hope I haven't done something and people aren't able to talk to me, because I like talking to you people. You guys are cute, cool people. Let's go check and see. Allow viewers to message you. Yes. See if that helps. All right. Things change. All right. If you guys can if you guys can message me and let me know if that works. If you can now talk to me. Anyway, a long time ago, back when the dinosaurs rolled the earth, I was at Montclair State University, and we have what's called a commuter lounge. We had a commuter lounge where students would come and sit and watch TV. And so um, they were watching one of these dance. I don't know if it was Set It Off or one of these dance. You Got Served. That's what it was. So in the movie, the rich white dance group that had uniforms and outfits and all the rest of that stuff went to the finals breakdancing competition and lost to a bunch of scrappy people of color who didn't have any outfits or uniforms or anything like that, and they were angry. It's like, I can't believe they beat us. It's like, oh, this is a travesty. How dare they beat us? It's like, and so I walked up, that's the only scene that I saw, and I was pleasantly amused by this whole thing, and I was like, well, isn't this ironic? And the person who was sitting there, the woman that was sitting there, a young student, said, well, what's so ironic about it? And I said, well, it's ironic that a bunch of white people are mad and surprised that they got beat in breakdancing by a bunch of black people. And she looked at me and she goes, I don't get it. And I'm like, what do you mean? What don't you get? It's like, why wouldn't they be why wouldn't they be surprised that black people beat them in breakdancing? And I was like, oh, wait a minute. It's like, you do know that black people invented breakdancing, right? And they were like, no. The only people that I have ever seen breakdancing, she said, were Asian people. I've never seen black people breakdancing. And my heart just sunk. I can't. I have told that story a million times because it broke my heart that something that we had a complete lock on, and sometimes we're vilified for doing. When you had, remember the days when people would put out cardboard and break dance on top of it in the middle of the sidewalk, and there were the big boom boxes and Electric Boogaloo and all of these people were had movies and stuff like that, right? So it was mind blowing that that they had never known black people to breakdance, and the only people that they saw breakdancing were Asian people, and it is another one on the list of things where black people originated something, somebody else took it and it became their thing. Jazz, rock and roll, breakdancing, rap, right? So that broke my heart. So fast forward, why am I bringing this up? Fast forward to this week where the IOCC, the International Organization Olympic Committee, or IOC, has decided that breakdancing will be part of the 2024 Olympics. Competitive breakdancing will be part of the 2024 Olympics. I'm ecstatic. I mean, it has come a long way from when I used to do the wave and trying to do the windmills and the body roll and the snake and the worm and do all of these different break dance. Yes, I used to try to break dance. Don't judge me. Everybody back in those days all tried to break dance, and at a certain point in time, they either were successful with it and joined the crew or realized that this wasn't for them. I was one of those people that realized this wasn't for me, right? At any rate, so I'm really excited that that thing that I used to do way back when in the fledgling life of breakdance and all the rest of that is now going to be part of on the worldwide stage as an Olympic competition, right? And for those of you who are like, how is that supposed to be an Olympic competition? There are ribbon dances that are part of the Olympic competition, right? So like people running around with a ribbon and doing gymnastics while while running around with a ribbon or a hula hoop is an Olympic competition. So breakdancing could be an Olympic competition. Anyway, so it's official. They're gonna take a test run and see if this works. And I don't I have to go look it up again and see whether or not it's an official or if this is a test run on 2024. Here's my concern, and I brought up that story that I talked about. It will be a travesty. I'm going to say this one more time. It will be an absolute travesty if the first time that breakdancing is on the world stage and gets, people have the opportunity to compete in breakdancing, that somebody from that a group that is not of African descent does not win it all. I can't begin to tell you how heartbroken I would be if the first time that breakdancing is an Olympic competition that black people don't win it. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's like if karate was the first time that the karate was out there, and the first people that won the first ever karate Olympic competition was a team from Australia. It just doesn't feel right. It shouldn't. The people who originated this thing should be the people, at least the first people who be like, all right, and here's how you do it, right? If the people who originated are not the first winners, and it means that it was just stolen, and that's the only way that I could put it. And the sad part about it is there are no high level black teams out there. There are some. There are some that are doing some really weird and freaky stuff too. There's a team from Brooklyn that does the bone breaker thing where they take their arm and they break it all the way in the back and all the rest of the stuff. That's a whole nother level of crazy. Still dancing, but if you're like us, and we used to watch America's Best Dance Team and World of Dance, and we watched So You Think You Could Dance. Like, we love dance shows, right? There are really good teams out there, but the break dancers are not black break dancers. And if they're out there and if they're hearing this and they're like, oh my God, we've got to represent for the culture, now's the time to put stuff together, right? Twitch from So You Think You Could Dance. You need to put a team together for the culture. Oh my God, could you imagine? Oh, this is going to drive me crazy. If the Olympic, the first time that breakdancing is in the Olympics, that it's not won by black people. Oh, that'd just break my heart. It would absolutely just break my heart. At the very least, it got to be on the podium, right? You got to be on the podium. You got to have a black team on the podium somewhere. Just, I'm just having a hard time even thinking about the specter of that. Anyway, I'm going to take another hard pivot. One of the things that we are seeing. Anyway, good luck to everybody going to the Olympics who's going to try to get on these teams. I might have to dust off my mat and see if I could bust a windmill real quick and get on a team. Maybe they'll have a over 50 team and be a little bit more kind to us geriatric folk. You talk what you want. I still got moves. Granted, the next day after the moves, I will need a full body massage and treatment and a sling. But for that one day, I got moves. Anyway, so there's an interesting thing happening in New York City, and this is a real throwback to the early days of this country in the 1940s, and so since the coronavirus, a lot of restaurants have shut down, and a lot of takeout restaurants have also were all shut down, and they'll have a hard time to making money. Some of the restaurants that were the hardest hit were Chinese food restaurants. And this had a lot to do with bias and propaganda that was put out there, especially with the president of the United States calling it the China virus, right? So there was a lot of xenophobia that was happening against our Chinese American brothers and sisters, and a lot of their restaurants were losing customers in droves, sorry. Um, and so when restaurants were able to reopen, they were already struggling to get customers. So a lot of these restaurants were failing, these Chinese food restaurants. And if you've been to New York City, there is a Chinese food restaurant every 2 or 3 blocks. And so they're ubiquitous and they're a part of our fabric. And they're everywhere. So every kind of restaurant, every kind of neighborhood you can think of, there's a Chinese food restaurant. But a lot of them were failing because of all of this propaganda behind the coronavirus and its origin. And so, what you're starting to see now is all of these restaurants are closing down. In their place are a bunch of seafood restaurants that are popping up. And they're called something crab. Krusty Krab. No, that's SpongeBob. Anyway, there are a bunch of seafood restaurants that are popping up in the places of the Chinese food restaurants, and they all look exactly alike. They all have vinyl appliques on the window you can't actually see in. The menus all look exactly alike, and they all are in the same restaurants that were closed down. So here's a little bit of history for you. Chinese restaurants through the early part of the early 1900s were welcomed, and then became vilified after the World Wars because of propaganda, and they were deemed to be unsanitary and yada yada yada. But the Chinese immigrants that had come over had a system, right? They would all, families and entire collectives would all come together, and they would work a particular restaurant, and when they built up enough capital, that one of the people that were in that restaurant would sprout off and do another restaurant, and they would then recreate the entire process. So one restaurant spawned out a whole bunch of different restaurants, and they all had a rubric, they all had a template for the way that these restaurants would be run. And this is why when you go to Chinese restaurants, the menu looks exactly the same from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant. They all are not owned by the same person. They're all owned by different people, but there is a template and there is a system. There's also a Chinese Food and Restaurant Association, as I'm sure you would expect. And so there was a streamline, there is a way to do all of this stuff. And so there also was a naming scheme, because the Food and Drug Administration, or whatever it used to be called back then, were looking at these restaurants, and because there was all the propaganda about Chinese immigrants, they all had to come up with names that made them seem like fine dining establishments. So that's where you see is like Jade Palace and Banquet this and so all of these different names that made it seem like they were fine dining institutions, and that's why they have 1 or 2 seats in front of the counter, because they had to give this impression to the place that they were registering the restaurant with, that it was a fine dining establishment. So they put all of this stuff in place, and now we don't even think about it, right? Like, why is this place called Palace, right? It's not a palace, it's a takeout place, right? That's the reason. And again, they pass the information on to each person, right? So you take that information, you go do the exact same thing 10 blocks away, and then and we're going to bring in some more other people to help you, and then when you get enough money, we're going to take one of those people and they're going to do another restaurant 10 blocks away, and so on and so forth. And that's how it spread throughout the country. And you are seeing the exact same thing happen again. The same owners of all of these Chinese restaurants are pivoting because people don't want to go into Chinese food restaurants anymore because of this propaganda. And now they are pivoting. It is the same people. They're the exact same owners, the exact same workers, and they're using the exact same system. So they all look exactly alike. So now you're going to start seeing a bunch of seafood restaurants and the Chinese food restaurants in all of your neighborhoods. You may not have seen them before, but now that you've heard me say this, everywhere you go, you're going to now start to see it. And I think it's a testament to a community being able to pull together, understand its circumstances, and pivot in a way that benefits the rest of the members of the community, right? Because they stood a real danger of losing their businesses because they had to spec. And the crazy thing is that the applique on the windows, they're completely blocked out. So you can't see inside of the restaurant. Why did they do that? Because they didn't want people to walk by and go, oh, it's a seafood restaurant. Wait, those are the same people that were in the Chinese food restaurant 2 months ago. I'm not going in there because I don't trust them. What happens now? You go into the restaurant, and by the time you get in and realize, this is the same place that I was in a couple of months ago, you're already there. And they're counting on the fact that you're hungry, which is why you walked in, and you probably don't want to go find another place to go eat, that you'll just go ahead and order. And your brain has already been tricked to not thinking that this person will pass this disease on to you, which is illogical to begin with. Not that people can't pass it on, but that only people of Asian descent can pass it on. That's the illogical and propaganda and xenophobic thought process, right? So that is I just wanted to highlight that, and I'm very impressed with it, right? Because they just like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna change all these restaurants to seafood restaurants, and we'll all do it together. That's the piece that is impressive to me. I'd love to see that with other communities where it's like, oh, this is what's facing us. Let's all come together and we'll do this thing that benefits all of us, right? All right. The last thing that I want to talk about that just came across yesterday, so I don't have very much information about it. But Hector brought up something a while ago about this servicewoman who had disappeared from Fort Hood. They could not find her. They weren't talking about where she had gone. They were just like, she just disappeared and went AWOL. But she had been abused and sexually assaulted in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Eventually, they found her, and they had found her body, and it was proven that she was in fact murdered. That led into an investigation into the practices of against women at Fort Hood and a lot of military establishments. And right now they are trying to reform all of the different ways that these women are experiencing bias and abuse and sexual assault on these military bases, starting with Fort Hood, and trying to reform the way that they treat their female officers. And I want to thank Hector for bringing that up and showing, telling us, bringing it to our attention, because he told us long before the news hit, and now it's a big story. But like, we've got to protect our women in the military. And the good old boys club that exists in the military is dangerous. And I pray, and you can come at me if you want, but I pray that my daughters never look at me and say that I want to join the military, because it's still not a safe place for women. And all they want to do is serve their country. And so until we make that happen, this is, it's just as bad as not allowing them to join at all. So anyway, I just wanted to thank Hector for bringing that to our attention, and in case he hasn't seen it, let him know that they're trying to make some reforms over there. So anyway, Christmas and the holidays and is coming, and tonight is the first night of Hanukkah. Happy Hanukkah to all of my Jewish friends or all people who follow the faith of Judaism. And I hope you have a bright and prosperous Hanukkah season. And I will see everybody next Thursday at the Greenhouse Effect. This has been your host, Hayden Greene, and y'all have a great weekend.